All right, so we're going to start back up. And Dr. Theobald directs GeoCivics, which asks geographic questions to address redistricting and emphasizes the role geospatial technology plays in drawing electoral districts. She is editor of the National Council for Geographic Education's journal, the Geography Teacher.
And a small plug for the geography teacher. There are several issues still over here, so you're all welcome to grab some of that. And for those of you who weren't able to join us yesterday, please make sure that you pick up some of the materials that will provide you with some foundational opportunities for discussing this topic. Particularly important is the redistricting criteria discussion, which we will reference today. So as I was listening to the discussion, it really made me think about the importance and the amazing work that is being done across the country in terms of redistricting at a grassroots level. And the discussion that my partner and I were having were, how important those individuals are. And, there's a discussion about scale, right? But it is incredible to me how, for instance, the people in Ohio, the Fair Districts Ohio folks, and I grew up in Ohio, so that's part of the reason I'm especially connected there, but they are just exhausted, right? They have been going through the call to have a fair districting process for several years. They thought they had a state constitution amendment put in place that would make things fair, but the redistricting commission that they have is completely made up of politicians. It is not independent. And so as a result of that, they have had maps that have been rejected by the state's the state court 7 times. And there's just no learning about this process, it seems, on the part of the people who are making the maps. But I have been on web calls with 400 people across the state. And so there are people out there who are caring and concerned about these issues. So that's really what I kind of wanted to just display here, is that there are people who do care. And I think, as we were hearing, small groups of people gathering and expressing their concerns really can make a difference. And that's very much a change from, say, the 2010 redistricting cycle. Well, all of a sudden these unfair maps came up and people were like, wow, what happened? And so as a result, they created a lot of these groups. So just we're going to be talking this hour about communities of interest. The Brennan Center for Justice. How many of you are familiar with the Brennan Center for Justice? Okay, if not, a really excellent source of information. And they have a wide variety of materials on there for teachers, for educators, but they also do a lot of academic research. So again, you're going to be able to, if you want to have a little bit more in-depth background material, Brennan Center for Justice is a great place to go, but then they also kind of help you translate it then for your students. Another really excellent website is the Constitution Center. So again, those of you who are maybe more geography focused and aren't teaching government classes might not be familiar with that resource, but that's also really useful. So this is how one describes communities of interest. And there have been a great many, academic assessments of how well communities of interest fit into the redistricting process. And sometimes in a state, they aren't mentioned at all. They're saying we don't really care. In your state, it's in apportioning the state Senate. So they only mentioned the Senate, not the state house or the congressional districts. Consideration shall be given to economic and political interests to the extent feasible. I think that they're also generally applying those to the state house and the congressional districts. But this is pretty, minimal, economic and political interests. So let's take a minute. Do we have any? We do not. Okay, so I'm not going to write on the board, but, oh, no, wait, here. Ha. I can write on the board. So let's just brainstorm a little bit about what, how some groups that you could in Oklahoma have in terms of economic and political interests that would be counted as communities of interest. In Oklahoma, it's economic and political. Now, we can also say there are some things that you think might be communities of interest that wouldn't necessarily apply in that particular definition. So, band students, right? Are they a community of interest? Musicians in general, people who support musicians. Well, arts, right? You can kind of expand that. And do people go and lobby for money for arts? Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, let's just say arts could be a community of interest. All right. So who else is going to be a community of interest?
But do you consider like oil and gas?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can do an industry. That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Okay. You're going to have to tell me what that is.
Oklahoma Education Resources Board.
Okay.
So they're kind of sub under oil and gas.
All right. Who? Yes.
The tribes.
Absolutely.
Maybe like agriculture, ag.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, and all of that. So, yeah, agriculture generally, kind of like arts generally. Okay. Mm-hmm.
What about ROTC programs?
Well, go above that.
Military.
Military, right? So, for instance, I live in Colorado Springs. We have 5 military bases. Military is a huge community of interest. Yeah. Who else? Mm-hmm. Somebody said, so is religious. So go back to what Oklahoma says, which is economic and political interests.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because religion, they have taken on a political interest, but we're supposed to have division and separation of church and state.
Right. So think back to the civil rights era when a lot of organizing was done in the African American churches, right? Was that a community of interest? Were they looking for political action for the religious organization? They were organizing through religion, right?
But they were looking for their community.
Yeah.
And I would think too, if you think back to our very case,
Mm-hmm.
they attacked specifically African American pastors, ministers who had gone to comfort the Arbery family. They specifically attacked them in the courtroom as being activists. And these are people like, of course, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Reverend Al Sharpton, but they were like literally like the pictures are consoling the mom because it's hard to hear. But these people were specifically attacking them, not because they were ministers, but because they were activists who used their pulpit as that. And so that's
Right. But it happens in every, across the spectrum, right? So, but really though, I think it would be difficult to say that geographically a religious organization actually could go to lobby a community for its own interests, right? So
What about the Mennonites and the
so that's an interesting different, okay, so is there a particular, would that be considered also maybe a community that also has practices? Is there any kind of governing? Are there any kind of regulations?
there are.
Okay, So anything, a community that has regulations makes sense. The regulation, of course, that's engaging with religious communities is whether you're taxed or not because you do political activities, right?
They're not taxed.
They aren't taxed. But the question now, that intersection of religion and government becomes, if you are advocating a particular perspective from the pulpit, then does that bring you into the political realm, and therefore your organization is actually not 501c3 but 501c4? That there is, yeah. So that's the discussion about kind of the intersection of religion and community. So that's like an entire seminar in itself. Let's leave that one, okay? And it's not to say that religious organizations do not have points of view, right? Many are supporting refugees. Many are supporting particular aspects of a community, right? And they are lobbying sometimes on behalf of their members, but they are properly, one would make that break between the 501c3 and the 501c4.
I can't remember the name of the group, the Jewish group that had the long curls, the
Hasidic. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in Long Island, they started taking over the school boards.
Right. So that's
an agenda.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And not dissimilar to school boards across the country,
Yeah.
right? Where people with a particular plan are. So, right. So this is not a theoretical problem or opportunity to discuss this, right? There is no bright line really between this separation of church and state, like we kind of imagine sometimes. Okay, so yes, I'm going to put religion up here, but not in the same way that tribes or agriculture, right? That's a different kind. You can say there's going to be the beef council or whatever it is. Yes.
I was going to say animal activists. You've got the PETA, and then you've got the other groups that do the rescues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what would they be? How would they be a community of interest engaging with the government?
Well, like for example, the negotiation of the wild horses. There was a lot of stuff, particularly in the, I'd say, late 70s, early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of activity with that. Also with the rescues, there's a big fight going on now because the U.S. government of agriculture has walked away from, horse meat and stuff like that. So now a lot of horses that really should not be in that train to Mexico or to Canada, they find themselves in that position because the U.S. government has stepped back from that.
So anytime we're engaging with land, right, space, how do we manage that?
Yeah.
So,
We left out environmentalists.
okay. Which we should all be, because we all live here
Well, I mean,
on
the
Earth.
activists,
No, I
right?
know, I know. Okay. Any big things we've left out? Yes.
I would say the wind, solar, geothermal, so renewable energy, that's a big
Renewable
one
energy.
because there's always a big battle between oil and gas lobbyists
Mm-hmm.
and no lobbyists.
But-
Oklahoma, at least.
So that's also, again, kind of industry, right?
Yeah.
You're generally talking about private industries that are making. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, so make sure you've got your computers ready to go, is to actually then draw your own community. So sometimes we really get hung up on these communities of interest, and how are we going to define that? And I would recommend to you that we think about first just drawing and describing our communities. Now, about 6 days ago, I did this activity with a group called representable.org, and I ran through it to prepare for this. And then the representable.org site has gone down. So I'm really disturbed by this, and so you're not going to be able to actually use this particular tool, but I want to take you through it because I think they have done an excellent job about giving people this particular tool to describe your community. So you would go on, so don't try to do this now, just watch. You would select your state, and then it talks about redistricting in each state, right? So it's really enabled you to say, specifically for this state, here's how we think about redistricting. And as you can see here, they've kind of given a little bit more explanation about communities of interest in Oklahoma and how this applies to a community of interest, a longstanding population that shares social, cultural, ethnic, and economic similarities. Communities do not necessarily share the same political viewpoints or support for certain candidates or political parties. And so you saw, right, that your community of interest definition was in Oklahoma really pretty minimal. So then you would get this map. And the part that is very helpful is you can, you're going to name your community, and you can see here that there are, on the right-hand side, different communities that people created over the course of this redistricting process that they uploaded to Oklahoma. And of course, you're going to have to sign up and tell them your information. And part of this is so that they could prevent people from, you know, having lots of bots come in and create a particular community and saying this should not be, divided, or it should be divided, or whatever. It's supposed to be real people. And so this is how my organizations are set up. So you can see that I had a couple political geography classes. And so the way I set those up was the link only went to my students. So this is actually not public. I can link to it, but the students can go on and then they could see how their fellow classmates were defining their communities. And it might be really different, right? Because we're a regional university at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. We have people commuting. We do have some students who live on campus, right? So their footprint might be really small. Whereas if I've got somebody living north in Castle Rock or east out on the plains, they're going to have a much different conception of their community. So that's really helpful to be able to see. And, you know, your students might be more similar or not. Again, you get, this was designed for community mapping drives. Like, all right, we really want to make sure that the people in this community their voices are heard, because a lot of people on this board right here, their voices have lobbyists, right? But the people who are simply living in a neighborhood that perhaps doesn't have a lot of economic power, those voices are not heard. And that was the purpose of representable.org and some other groups, is to be able to say, we want to make sure that in this redistricting process, your voice is heard. And so when you map that, when you visualize and explain what your community looks like, then you have a lot more power. So that was the purpose of this particular tool. And I'm really hoping, and Andy, I think you're trying to connect with them as well to make sure that they get this back up. So that's why you've got something on here like create a community mapping drive. So I just use that as saying, create a classroom mapping activity. So this is, as I was saying, you can see there's kind of a concentration of color there in Colorado Springs, where you've got a lot of people overlapping on the campus. But we also have kind of north, and then there's a whole section here. This is basically somebody who lived out in this area, right? And that was their community of interest, and they would commute into Colorado Springs. So again, there is a ton of information of background detail on this particular website. And my favorite part about this particular tool is that it guides you through asking questions to describe your community, right? So just where do people in your community gather or socialize? How does your community access services? Thinking about cultural, historical interests, economic interests, and it really leads you through those questions. So I am hoping that this will recover itself and show up again, because asking your students just to answer these questions is a really, really good exercise, because it helps them think about their interests. I did this with a high school class a couple years ago, and one of the students said, "We really need safer playgrounds. There isn't a place for the younger kids to play. They don't feel safe. We need to be able to get them outside." And I was like, wow, okay, you've got something now that you want to advocate for, and you can visualize for a city council or a county commission, right? So students really do have clear ideas about how things are working or not in their neighborhoods. And again, you don't have to write a giant essay about it, right? You can do some bullet points. You can just help those students transfer their information to a different resource. So then you get to name your community. So I just named my community, sample Oklahoma City community. And then you can search on a zip code. This happens to be where my husband's cousin lives, who I'm going to go see later today. Thank you very much for this opportunity to connect with family. And so I picked their neighborhood. I really have no idea. Okay, I said yesterday that, right, it's really important for people who are in the place to be actually doing the redistricting. I was like, well, they kind of live between these two highways. I wonder if that's kind of a community. Anybody want to make a comment about how I've described this community?
A lot of
new home construction. Okay. All right. So anyway, it's that's what I described as this community. And you have to also go through, say you're not a robot, all that kind of thing. I made my community. Oh, oops, sorry. Okay. So the coolest thing about this resource is you can see these data layers, right? So if I had this resource online, we would have been able to look at how this community is either in one congressional district, is it divided among school districts, state houses, all of these different divisions, right? And ways that we think about organizing people. The representable.org folks have put into this system so that you can look at that and see how everybody is grouped together, theoretically. And then you can also look at demographics and some of the election data. So yeah, too bad for us. Representable.org is offline, and I'm not going to worry about that now. Andy, maybe you can be the person who communicates to people when it comes back up online.
Sure, yeah, we'll share it. Not if it's helpful. You may know this, Rebecca, but I ran the ballot initiative a couple of years ago for independent redistricting here in Oklahoma, and we used Representable extensively. I got at least maybe 2 or 3 videos where we did like live usage of it and walk what you just went through, but you can see people click. It's not much different, but it was interesting. And can I ask a question now that I'm talking? One of the things that I thought was interesting in trying to draw, even if you went to the smallest level, right? If you're picking census blocks, was that most of us are not aware of what our census tract is around us. And so in my neighborhood, for example, we have a historical district that's a half mile square, and in the neighborhood just north of us is like our cousin. Like it's all pretty close, and there's a grocery store there. It's a pretty nice little community. But if you, in trying to draw it just for how we identify ourselves, couldn't, like, because the census tracts kind of some would connect. You're like, well, okay, like I get it, but I found myself and some of our supporters that were doing it, found themselves being a little frustrated that they couldn't draw it as cleanly as they would like, which I think maybe speaks to the complexity of this issue.
Right, absolutely. And so, right, there's no perfect result to this, but it does give you a sense of what that map looks like. So we're going to go to Districtr. So if you do not have a computer, if you would hop over next to somebody who does have a computer and look with them. So districtr.org. Let me know if you have difficulty accessing that. So this is brought to you by the Metric Geometry and Gerrymandering Group, who's run by somebody named Moon Duchin. Anybody heard of Moon? Oh, you should know her as a mathematician. So she, about 2017, was really writing a lot of articles about the importance of addressing redistricting mathematically, right? And so we would be able to solve the redistricting problem by approaching it from a mathematical perspective. And I love the mathematicians, and there cannot be too many people working on this project. I came at this from a geography perspective and said, you know, okay, there's math, but there's also like rivers and mountains and how people are grouped together. So you really can't, it's not just a math problem. It's not just a geography problem. We all need to collaborate here. So the Districtr folks also have this communities of interest tool. So you can go to this tool, right? And again, remember that this is not built for educators, but there's no reason you can't use it.
I'm getting the page isn't working.
Oh, no, the Districtr people too are not working?
No, it's working for me.
Okay.
Okay.
well, I did wrong.
Okay, shoo. I'm like, really? The stars are not aligned here. All right, so then you should be able to go to Oklahoma, and you can see here that you can either draw your districts or draw communities. And today I'd like you to go to the draw communities piece.
I'm sorry, I missed how you got there.
Districtr, Districtr.
I got that.
Yeah, and then click on your map. You should be able to scroll down and click on your state. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Right. Sometimes, you know, and this is, of course, why you want to have really clear instructions. We'll get an opportunity to test those in a little bit. So again, you can draw your community. And so here in Oklahoma, they're saying identify a community built out of the 2020 voting VTD. What's a VTD, Andy? Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay. So it's got to be some kind of voting district, right, that they have created. A precinct, maybe? I'm not sure. Okay, so that's a good question. So here's the page that I want you to get to. So this is the difference. This page actually, I think, is the major difference between representable.org and Districtr. It says, describe your community. Yeah, well, that's great, right? But the representable.org people gave you like 4 different questions, right? They were just better at saying, what do you want to, you know, give me some ideas. Because if you ask anybody, a student or, you know, member of the community, they're going to be like, I don't know how to describe my community. What do you want to know? Right? There are nice people there. I mean, so anyway, this is my beef with the, with the representable.org or with the Districtr people. I mean, so anyway, you start out this way. You've got your map, right, of your state, and clearly, right, we're all addressing. Because the election laws are written the way they are, we start really with the state as the biggest entity. So then I look, it's the same kind of area, right? I still picked my cousin's space, but the choices, as Andy is saying, were a little different, right? I couldn't actually get the part right between the highways, which is what I was looking for. It required that I have a little bit of a bigger area. But what you can do is also look at, look at the different pieces of information. I think I didn't do a screen capture for all of these, but if you create, you know, just your neighborhood, your area, how you want to define it. And then make sure that you look at the data layers, that you scroll down and look at the population. And you can see how the area that you have chosen compares to the whole state, right? So that's also some really interesting data analysis that you can do. So again, the other thing that's really nice about many of these sites is that they give you background information, right? Where did you get this data? Okay. And I think that that's really important for students to understand, because they're looking at their phone. They have no idea what is underneath, getting from point A to point B, right? So helping them understand just what a shapefile is, right, is a good thing. Okay, and that's my questions. So what I would really like you to do is basically draw your own community. And explore a little bit. And you're going to want to do that by using this paintbrush up here. So you have to explore with these tools. So this is the pointer tool that will move you around, the little hand. The paintbrush will allow you to create a community. And again, you don't have to feel constrained that it's simply where you live and shop, right? You could say, if you play golf, right, and the golf course is a really integral part of your life, and the school where you teach is someplace, and your house, that might be your whole community because you care about how all of those areas are governed. And then if you don't like what you've put in, this is an eraser. Okay, and then the magnifying glass will take you into a closer view. So, Andy, do you have anything else to add? Did you use this tool at all?
No, I usually represent a bowl and days.
Okay. So Districtr, all of these tools are a little different. I like Districtr for building districts pretty well, but again, I'm going to introduce you to a couple other tools as well. So we would have used this one for building districts, but now we're going to use it for looking at communities. So just take 10 minutes to kind of play with it a little bit, and then we'll come back and hear what you've found.
Is a representation of it.
Okay. Or are you an outlier, right? Is your community 75% white and you're not, right? That might give you particular information. Yeah.
Really just to be able to question, number-wise, it's I'm confused on the number that I got what you were saying about the older population. But then when I look at the Asian population, it says the population by race is 2.3, but the voting age by race is 2.3. So does that mean there's nobody below the age of 18?
It means it's consistent. It means that the population is neither aging nor particularly young. So for instance, in areas where there is a lot of reproduction in the Hispanic community, for instance, you're going to be skewed again. You're going to be skewed the other way.
Yeah, my number is lower for that one.
Okay, right, and so if the number is lower for the voting age than for the population at large, that means that population is younger. It compares to the population pyramid, right? If you're thinking of the population pyramid for a country like Nigeria, it really looks different than a country like Japan, right? And so that's actually what you're looking at. It's just a really short population pyramid, voting age versus non-voting age kind of thing. And it's not really a population pyramid because you're layering it on top of each other. So if you're saying, if you've got the voting age is 65% white, and when it says the total population is 60% white, that means that all of those students or all of those people who are not a voting age population, the younger population, there's not as many of them. But if you're looking then at, say, Native Americans, then, and maybe they're reproducing more, the total population is going to be whatever, 35%, that's not true. And then 30% is the voting age, right? So the question is voting age, right? And then also who's voting, and that's a whole different question. But if you're looking at a younger population, your total population is going to be larger and your voting age population is going to be smaller. And this is, right? It's really important then to say, look, this is a real world population conversation to have with the math folks, right? So again, that's why I say do some cross-disciplinary work, right? Have redistricting week in your school where everybody is talking about redistricting so that the math folks are giving lessons in how to read this information, and that the geographers are helping people understand how to read these maps and how to understand what the patterns are in your state over time as well as currently. Okay. Other thoughts about what you would want students to know, right? Because it's hard, right? I've said, here, go explore this map. And that's pretty, as much as you would like to not be banking, education, right? As much as you want them to explore, our job really is to guide students. Okay. All right. 1 minute left for any questions. Are you exhausted by GIS? Okay, you're not anywhere there yet. All right. I look forward to one more conversation with you this afternoon.
Thank you.
Sure.